Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here to join us for our next edition of our 49er Industry Chat. My name is Noemi Guevara, the Director of Alumni Engagement here at Cal State Long Beach. Before we start our session today, just want to let you know this session is being recorded and it will live on our website. Also, at any point throughout the session today, you have any questions, we encourage you to use the Q&A box to ask your questions, and this allows us to keep track of the questions. And now I would like to introduce our moderator, James Almada. He is an alum from the class of 2011 and a current council member for the CSUB Alumni Council. Thank you, James, for moderating today.
Of course, and thank you, Noemi, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. Welcome for sure. Just want to touch on a couple things. First, let me introduce myself. Yes, my name is James Almada, very proud member of the council and love working with our alumni and our student body. I work in communications and marketing, actually, so I'm really excited for our speaker today to learn a lot from him and also see some life experiences. I do want to mention again, just like Noemi did say, if you have any questions, definitely ask those. I'm going to kind of facilitate those towards the end, so just know that we're noting those, but definitely as he's going through his presentation, feel free to ask those questions in the box there. Yeah, so let's, without further ado, let me introduce our speaker for today. Ira Gostin is a proud Long Beach State alum. He began his journey at the beach in the 80s and later returned to earn his BS in occupational studies with a minor in journalism. Ira is an entrepreneur, marketer, influencer, and communications strategist who specializes in guiding business enterprises to achieve sustainable growth. In 2016, Ira founded 120 West Strategic Communications, an investor and public relations firm, which was acquired by another agency in 2018. Prior, Ira was a founding executive for a global publicly traded industrial company where he directed investor relations, corporate communications, and marketing for a $400 million IPO. Ira began his professional career as a photojournalist at the Associated Press before moving into marketing and communications work with the companies in the industrial, medical, and hospitality fields. Ira also holds an MBA with an emphasis in marketing from the University of Phoenix and is a graduate of the Executive Leadership Program at Columbia University. He is a coffee aficionado, baseball and Formula One racing fan, and enjoys the outdoors. Joining us from Reno, Nevada to lead today's industry chat is Mr. Ira Gostin. Welcome, Ira. There would be a round of applause if we were anywhere else, but welcome, please.
I am thrilled to be here. Let me launch my slides and we'll get started. Cool. Well, I'm thrilled to be here. I am definitely a proud alum, mostly because it was one of the, let me put it this way, grad school was a piece of cake compared to getting through Long Beach. And I'll kind of explain why as we go. So I've kind of split this up and I don't have controls. There we go. Okay. Into a few sections and really what I want to try and do is take you through the industry and what's going on in public relations today. And we're going to kind of then circle back at the end about my undergrad career and things that I should have done differently and some mistakes that I made along the way. And I know we've got some students and some recent grads, so we'll try and kind of make this full circle. And I'm just not advancing my slides. Okay, I think we're going. So this was me shortly thereafter, my last class at Cal State Long Beach in the 80s. I was in the journalism department, used to be down in the humanities building. We were in the basement, and I had an opportunity to go to Central America and photograph the Contras and Sandinistas, and I jumped on it. And I was 2 classes away from my degree, and I kept thinking, I'll just wrap it up when I get back. So we're going to circle back to this story. I kind of look at my life right now as 3.0. The first part of my career being a photojournalist for the Associated Press. I have been to 2 Summer Olympic Games. I've photographed presidents and world leaders and been all over the world for AP, and it was absolutely amazing. I moved to Reno about 26 years ago and started teaching photojournalism at the University of Nevada, and started getting a little bit of pressure because I didn't have my degree. So decided that I needed to make some changes in my life and kind of figure out where I was going. At that point, I really looked at the industry and where journalism was going and where communications was going. And you'll see a little bit more on my journey here as we go. PR is, the most trash talked in the journalism disciplines. But you'll see as we change sections through the slideshow, I will put some kind of fun quotes up here. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is the difference between PR and strategic communications? And the first reality is that people know what PR is. They think they know what PR is. And when I built 120 West, I called it 120 West Strategic Communications because I wanted it to come across a little more sophisticated, and it failed. I should have called it 120 West Public Relations because people get that. The first question is, what is strategic communications? I explain it to them, and they'd immediately go, oh, PR. So it is kind of funny. It's some schools really push the strategic communications. I know the University of Nevada really is pushing that. And I love the fact that Long Beach is just journalism and PR. And the curriculum is the same. It's just the labels are different. But at the end of the day, what makes really effective public relations or strategic engagement is that engagement piece. And when I was working in investor relations, which is basically financial PR, it was all about creating engagements. You're creating engagements with shareholders, with fund managers, with portfolio managers, with analysts. And there becomes a situation where you're creating a trust and a relationship. This is really what this is all about now. So this is what your friends and family think PR is. When I was in IR, my wife was like, I don't know how to tell people what you do. And I said, well, they're not going to understand it. So if it's not a sophisticated crowd that doesn't, it's some friends, or my wife's a nurse, nurses, just tell them I'm in PR. If it's anybody that has any financial background, tell them that I work in investor relations for a publicly traded company. If we're up at the university for a social event, tell them I'm an anthropologist. And she kind of laughed and she goes, you're an anthropologist? And it's like, sure I am. I'm trying to influence behavior to get people to do what I want them to do using whatever cognitive tools are at my disposal. Kind of a rough definition of anthropology, but, but this is really what PR is. It's varying degrees of, what you get to face on a daily basis. Yeah.
And link to that, Ira, just so
yeah, exactly. This is the cycle. You're constantly trying to, influence that media person to write a story about your client or about your company or whatever the specific is. There's great wins and there's huge lows, and you ride them like waves. So I was interviewed on a podcast for entrepreneurs a couple of years ago, and this just kind of popped out of my mouth, and I actually scribbled it down because I thought this was pretty good. And what it talks about is how public relations and communications is a way for a company to not just deal with a crisis, but to deal with wins. And, you know, every company goes through wins, every company goes through losses, and it's trying to talk about those in a way that either shareholders or stakeholders or whoever you're directing your communications to has some kind of takeaway. At the end of the day, public relations is about telling a story. And whether it's you do Hollywood PR and you're telling the story of an actor or actress, or a company, you know, I pretty much do B2B. I've done a couple retail projects and then a couple healthcare things that were a little more retail, you know, B2C. And I'm going to take a sip of water. We've got some serious fires up in Northern California, and their smoke is settling in Reno, and I'm kind of scratchy voice.
Oh, you're good.
So you want to engage, you want to have this story to tell, and really the really important part is align the story to your company goals. So whether it's your company or a client. So I put the we in italics. So this is how my company, we engage. And this is a system that I developed at 120 West. Everything we do is about stakeholder engagement. So a company has numerous stakeholders, and they normally only market to customers, but there's customers, employees, vendors, investors, family members, whatever the company does, we dive into it and really look at who the stakeholders are. Design thinking or customer-centric approach is really looking at the big picture, and we test everything. So, you know, whether we're just doing a PR campaign or we're doing a multifaceted marketing campaign, we're testing everything as we go. Telling the story. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the word touch points. It's kind of an old school marketing term, but it's every time your brand touches a stakeholder. So whether a billboard or a sticker or, you know, my wife and I bought a couple new beach chairs, and in the package attached to the chair was a really nice little card from the CEO of this outdoor company. And it's like, we take a lot of pride in the products that we make. If you ever need to reach out to me, here's my email. And it wasn't some generic CEO at, it was his name at. And now I'm sure that somebody, you know, checks his email, but it was an authentic, sincere outreach that definitely counts as a touch point. And the cost of it was a printed card and an envelope. The other thing in marketing that we don't seem to do enough is just to ask, how may I help you? I have clients that or prospective clients that I've never actually worked with, but, you know, through this pandemic, I've just, you know, if you need anything, if you just need to brainstorm something, let me know. How can I help you? So I always talk about, you know, you're driving up the 405 and you see this really cool billboard, and 10 feet past it, you're like, that was so cool. I have no idea what the company was. So they failed at number 3. There was some kind of message that resonated, right? You thought it was cool, but it didn't have a website, or it didn't have the name clearly stated. I see marketing like that all the time. They don't align the tactics to the audience. And so it's a super important piece. So, you know, you need to look at what's the story. And I put the asterisk in there. Not so much, it's basically your story or your client's story. So, you know, us consultants and agency folks, we're always telling our own story to market our own business, but at the same time, then we're developing a story for our clients. And that's how we build the stories, with sticky notes and a big giant wall. And we just start putting down all of the pieces of a company. What's important? What do we need to talk about? And the story starts to come together. You know, you just don't see things until it goes live, and then you're like, okay, we repeated that. Sorry about that. Dang, I'm human.
I know,
right? So I want to share, I've used this slide for other things, and it's really important, and I really know how blessed I am to have gotten to go through an IPO. And if you're not familiar with the phrase, it means initial public offering. It's when a company starts to sell stock on the open market. And, you know, it was pretty amazing. I was very new in not only my job, but in the industry. So really was just holding on to the tail of the dog running down the street. These are really important things, whether it's a public company or a corner market. If you're going to tell the story and you're going to do storytelling to engage, you need to follow these few rules. Pretty powerful statement from somebody that, you know, everybody knows, and you know, amazing entrepreneur. So, as this kind of the next couple slides, we're talking a little bit more about, you know, to newer grads, where I find I'm able to help as much as new grads is second job people. So you've got your first job, you did an internship in PR, you got your first job, you've been there for 3 years, you feel like it's time to move on. And these points are as important to that growth as they are to getting your first job. So I will kind of go through these bullets. The catalyst, for me, my catalyst was my MBA. That is what took me out of journalism and into marketing, and you know, took my career to kind of 2.0. Practice what you practice. What I mean by that is, if you're going to be a marketing and public relations expert, then that means you as a client need to do the same thing. Last year I was on campus and I talked to the Public Relations Student Society of America. And I asked the room, how many of you have a Google Analytics certification? Nobody raised their hand. How many of you have got any kind of marketing certifications from, it's called LinkedIn Learning now, it used to be Linda. Nobody raised their hands. It's like, you've got to keep yourself sharp. I have taken advanced economics classes at NYU and Colorado School of Mines, and the leadership program at Columbia University. They're big week-long programs where very intense, and you're pushing yourself hard, but you're staying on top of the business. You're not going to be successful every time. You're going to try something, you're going to go for that job, you feel like, oh, I nailed that interview, and you don't even get a second call back. And you just dust yourself off and their loss, and move on to the next opportunity. I'm really passionate about my work, and I built an agency from scratch. We were pretty close to $1 million a year, had employees, and wound up selling the agency to a much bigger agency, went to go work for them, was there for about 9 months, and realized that I really wanted to just be out on my own, allowing myself to kind of handpick the kinds of clients that I wanted to work for. But my passion always comes through when I'm talking to a new client. Set yourself apart. And that might mean, some contests, whatever it is, you're donating time. I lecture up at the university all the time. I'm visible in our community. It's important that you are sort of your brand. And part of that is also believing in yourself. So, that's probably the most important part, other than the last bullet, which is be human. So, when you duplicate a slide in a slide deck, you don't beat yourself up. It just happens. You can't believe it still. So let me tell you a little story. So my first career at Long Beach was not overly stellar. I failed Music 101 3 times. Ironically, when you go to a music class, you have to attend it, or you don't get to hear the music. So I just never had the positive attitude about education, and I was more concerned about my portfolio and my internships and where I wanted to go once I graduated. So I actually walked in spring of 1985, thought that I was going to be done, and I just never paid attention. Turned out that I had a couple W's, and my grade point average was horrible. And then I had this opportunity to go to Central America. So I jumped on that and went and had a pretty amazing time. My pictures were published all over the world, and came back to Long Beach and immediately started freelancing for the Associated Press. And I just never got out of my own way of the importance of finishing school. So suddenly, fast forward 18 years, and I live in Reno, and I'm teaching a class at the University of Nevada, and they're pushing me to get my degree. And I kind of always fell back on my Pulitzer Prize nomination as, I don't need my degree, except that you do. And I didn't finish something that I started. So I couldn't get back into the journalism department. And so at the time, the president was Robert Maxson, and there was a program that he initiated called Operation Greenlight. And it was for basic people like myself that had an expertise in a career over a decade that wanted to get a degree to teach what their expertise was. So there were police and fire and nurses. So, right, so they've been, teaching or doing, and now they're learning how to teach it. So occupational studies on campus, it's basically the practice of vocational education. It's teaching how to teach. And it's a different program than an education degree. But I was able to do that and go back and do this work remotely. I graduated with a 4.0, which I desperately needed to pull up my 1.9 pathetic grade point average from the first time around. And then Dr. Maxson went to the journalism department and said, look, he deserves to get his minor in journalism. And that was granted. So, it was tough. It was tough, and it was supposed to be tough because I just never really took it very seriously. And after that point, I was like, okay, I can do this now. And I immediately enrolled in grad school and earned my MBA. And that was my catalyst for the next stage of my life and my career. I love this slide because it's just got all these important points. None of them are the goal on their own, but together, everybody has their own definition of what success is. But these are some really key things of how to feel successful. You're the only one that can judge whether your career is a success or not. It's not up to somebody else, it's up to you. So I throw that in there because I love the slide. If you're not familiar with Seth Godin, he's a pretty amazing marketer and definitely an industry leader. And with that, my email address is there. I welcome questions now. Feel free to reach out to me if you have anything that you'd like to discuss. I'm always happy to jump on a Zoom call or regular old phone call, and happy to take some questions.
So I think that was perfect, Ira. I think the next part of this conversation will be a conversation, right? And I think a lot of good nuggets that I kind of got. I think we got a few questions that have come in that I can definitely ask you. I first wanted to say thank you for sharing your story and your insight about the profession, right, and how you kind of see that as a storytelling and connecting with folks. I also wanted to say thank you for your story of perseverance, right? Because I think when I think about how COVID has impacted university settings, right, a lot of the stories that I hear from our students is, it's that tumult they went through in March and April and May. A lot of that was, trying to figure out how to keep going, right, and how important that degree is. And a lot of students, I think, had to weigh those options, right. And I think your story is so important right now because education is always going to be that thing that you need to have that really helps you build a catalyst, right, into your life that opens that next chapter. So just wanted to thank you for sharing your story for sure. And maybe we'll dive into that with more questions that come through. But just wanted to say that first. So one of the things that I think, we were, as I was listening to you talk and kind of looking at our questions here, is about the profession when it comes to, getting folks interested in your ideas, right? And being passionate about that. So one of the questions that came through actually was about pitches, right? And how to maybe make those interesting, and then kind of working through that with your clients and that kind of work. What do you find is so important about, well, how do you start that process for you and your group?
So I have a portable whiteboard that I take to, when we meet with clients. I actually have some kind of app that is a whiteboard that we can put sticky notes on. And it's kind of like a hybrid process of a vision, mission statement, you want to kind of pull out what is unique about the company, what's special. And so many times we'll be pushing, and it's like, well, but how are you different? Like, what makes you a different business owner? Well, my grandfather or great grandfather worked for Thomas Edison, and that was kind of cool. Like, wait, okay, seriously, like this? Okay, so rip everything else off the wall. Let's start with that. Descendants of the Edison days. And it's a conversation that the client or the CEO shouldn't be comfortable with. They should be kept off balance while you poke and prod and try and get to the center core of what you do or what they do. And then you start to craft the story. People like, oh, well, I'm in PR. I shouldn't rehearse this, or I shouldn't craft it. But you do want to do that. It does need to be rehearsed. I hate the word pitch because as a baseball fan, I think of somebody throwing a fastball at my head. But it's when you're trying to do that, you're trying to come up with a specific reason for that person to get more information.
Yeah, I think you say that, and that's exactly where I think, asking questions, that conversation that's the most important that I find sometimes is that very first conversation and really getting what is the essence? What are they trying to sell, or what are they trying to communicate to that audience, and understanding their audience too, right? It tends to be a big part of that conversation. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of companies make that mistake. I've had clients where I'll go in, one of the retail clients that I had was in the food industry. And I went in the day the owner was gone. And I asked everybody a couple of questions. He hadn't shared anything with anybody. Mm-hmm. So we're doing all this work, but his stakeholder group, his employees, weren't even aware of it. And, if somebody calls and says, hey, I want to get that special that I heard on the radio, they didn't know what it was. So it's really important to really track who's getting what information. Does a vendor group of stakeholders need the story tweaked a little bit different? You just have to work it through.
Mm-hmm. We're also getting some, thank you. And I think we're getting some other questions just about tools, right? I think what you kind of use and how you communicate. I know there's a conversation from
hammer. A hammer.
Just a hammer, yeah, right. And kind of just about, marketing tools and things that you find really effective, especially, you said always being a learner, right? So I'm sure for you, that's also looking at what's new out there and how people are using those. But some advice for our listeners today, our viewers today, about just different tools and what maybe you found effective. And also a little bit about email marketing. I think there's a lot of conversation about, I think some folks think they don't want to use it, or they do want to use it. So it would be great to have your insight for our viewers on that.
Yeah, so tool-wise, I'm a big fan of untraditional touch points. So what does that mean? Using a slide deck instead of a PDF, where somebody can go through a 6-slide deck. And again, you're telling the story as opposed to a brochure, which is a little more of a sales tool. I handwrite hundreds of notes a year. I do that quite a bit. One, I like paper. I love the tactile feel. And that's kind of, there's young people going, why? I don't know. I just like it. So I like handwriting a card, and it's noticeable. People will comment or send me an email. Whoa, I got your card. Nobody sends cards anymore. Thanks so much. Appreciated, whatever the situation. That asking, how may I help you, is a huge tool. It doesn't sound like it, but how many people got when the pandemic really started and they started shutting down and all of a sudden we're stuck at home? How many of you got, dear customer, dear valued customer, dear fill in name, because they forgot to do it right? During these tumultuous times, during these times of uncertainty, blah, 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 blah. What was missing? That sincerity piece, right? I talked about kind of some things that you need to have. So yeah, you need to stay in touch with your customers, but it's got to come across in a way that makes them want to get the next touch point. Is for retail, if you're not using Google My Business, get rid of your website. Like, just shut it down, because and if you're not updating it, so you can manually update that. Well, let's say you're running a cafe and you're on 2nd Street down on the shore and your hours changed because of the pandemic. You can go in and update that. But if it says you're open at 7 a.m. for breakfast and I show up and there's a sign in your window that says we don't open till noon for lunch, I'm never coming back. You have lost me because you don't know how to use the technology. And I'm an old guy and it bothers me. So, if you're a person that lives on your phone and you want that information, you need to stay on top of that. You look at the restaurants that have been successful through the pandemic. They have pivoted quickly. There was a restaurant here that was doing like a family meal. You could get 2 roasted chickens and vegetables and potatoes and a dessert for $45, I think. And for my wife and I, it was enough food for a week. And, that was a great way for them to stay relevant until they reopened the store and they stopped doing it. It's like, why would you stop doing that? And the girl goes, I don't know. We sold a ton of them. Well, somebody was like, okay, the doors are, but we're not going to go sit down in your restaurant. Customer service. We were driving through Northern California a couple weeks ago. We just had to get out of town for a day. And we stopped at this restaurant and I had totally forgotten, this was before the governor shut down everything. But that certain counties had restaurants closed. So I went up, put her name in. There was 4 outside tables. She didn't say a word. It's like a half an hour for a 10-minute wait. Like, what's going on? But I don't see anybody coming out of the restaurant. Finally, I remembered reading an article, and whatever county we were in was one of the counties that got shut down for indoor seating. And it's like, hey, don't you think it would have been helpful? She goes, well, I didn't know you weren't from here. You're off I-80. Like, what are the odds of a visitor? Like, it's pretty high. Mm-hmm. So customer service is a tool if you treat it like one, which means, marketing should be creating customer service talking points. The food-related business that I had as a client, I did a sales training for their team. I said, the word upsell has a bad connotation. How about if we call it help sell? What? I go, when somebody comes in and buys something, if you can suggest something that's going to make the meal that they're cooking for their family a little bit better, are you upselling or are you helping them? Mm-hmm. And it totally changed their outlook on it.
That makes me think about one of the questions we actually got a little while ago, which is about creativity. And I think one of the things in your field is about being creative. So the question is kind of, how do you find your creativity? And then are there recommendations that you have for people to stay up to date on how they can push themselves, also not just creatively, but in marketing as a craft? So 1, how do you find your creativity? And then kind of 2, How do you stay up to date about ways to stay creative and be a marketing professional?
Yeah. And I want to wrap up one thing. Like, there's a bunch of technical tools. There's HubSpot and there's this and there's that. I don't get really caught up in it because there's no one size fits all. So I worry more about how are we going to touch that prospect and convert them into the sales funnel than I am about the physical tool that I use to get them there. Every client has its own requirements. If you go to my LinkedIn, I just promoted yesterday a friend of mine's article, 26 ways to engage your brain or be smarter. It's a great article. Okay. I don't remember the title. Yeah. But what she talks about is the average commute in the U.S. was 26 minutes in each direction. She lives in San Diego, and so her idea of the 405 is totally different than anybody that lives in the basin. So, numbers will vary where you live. But what she did was say, okay, if you only took one of those commute stretches, what could you do every day for 26 minutes to make yourself smarter, more engaging, bring creativity into your life? I write a lot. I write articles. Sometimes they're pretty left brain. I like to look at different kinds of art. A lot of times I'll just read. It really depends on what kind of mood that I'm in. Hugging the dogs is a great way for me to wind down and just relax. And I kind of am on all the time. So it's really, anytime I can go out in the backyard and sit and it's nice out and just chill, I'll carry a notebook around with me because I'll think of something. I'll say, oh, this would be a great way for this client. So it's one of the things that I learned in occupational studies, which turned out to be super important, is we all have cognitive learning domains. So some people learn by reading. Like when I was at school, so some of you may not know what a typewriter is, I'm sorry. But I would longhand write out my notes. I would go home every night, type them. I never looked at them again. The physical act of typing is the domain, learning domain is learned by doing. So think about if you have sat through a webinar or a computer software training. Like, I can't watch a video. So here's two domains. You've got visual and audio. I cannot learn anything that way. I need to physically do it. So what I'll do is launch another computer, and while I'm watching the webinar or the video, I'll work alongside it on another computer. But I need to have my hands involved to learn that. So when you understand that about yourself, and it's not anything complicated, you just have to think about, okay, did I get anything out of this webinar? Do I need to practice it? Do I need to go do something? When you learn that about yourself and understand that you might need one or two areas of input. So I'll give you an example. So I'm working with a client that's a little more on the operations side, not the PR side. And sorry. So they would have their daily Zoom call and assignments would be given out. And stuff wasn't getting done. So I did a Google survey and I did a phone interview with each person. The entire team, audible only, was the lowest scoring cognitive domain that there was. they were all had, the one person could see it and memorize it, but everybody else had two. So audible and visual, whatever it was. So I said, you've got to start, take your list of things you're going to give each person and then follow it up with a brief Slack message. By the way, tools that I love Slack. I don't love Zoom quite as much, but I like it a lot too. Once they started doing that, the problems with people forgetting and not getting stuff done just disappeared. So it's, as a marketer, sometimes you're called on to come up with solutions that have nothing to do with marketing. It's completely internal, but it's still, right? It's still communications. It's engaging with one of the groups of stakeholders, an important one.
That's great, thank you. And I did kind of want to tie to another question that we're getting, and I think also it ties a little bit back maybe to the email question that I'm sorry I moved past and didn't get back to. But when it comes to different touch points, right? So one, could talk a little bit about your perspective on email, but also when you say, untraditional or different types of touch points, do you consider traditional media as a untraditional type nowadays, or is that now evolved? Like, kind of thoughts on that. So a little bit on marketing and a little bit on untraditional media.
Okay, well, let's talk about email marketing. I love email marketing, but you can't be lazy. So when I'm talking to a team about, and I have like a great digital marketer that does all for email marketing for our clients. But it's like those people have entrusted us with their email address. So we have to reward that trust with content that matters. So, if I get a newsletter and it says, hey, look, here's the CEO's new Porsche, and the next thing is, here's $1 off your next purchase of $500 or more, I'm hitting the unsubscribe button. Like, I'm not getting anything out of this. So you have to deliver content. Working on gathering a list is really strong. I love what we call back and forth. So I go to the website, pop-up comes up, join our mailing list. So I put my name in, great. And an hour later, I get an email that says, we just want to make sure that you really wanted to join our list. And if you click here to approve, we'll send you the free guide on how to get your dogs to tap dance. Cool, that'll be fun. Click on that. Then a week later, I get another email that says, send us a video of your dog's tap dancing. So there's just a back and forth of engagement that you've now got a customer. It's not a matter of if they buy from you, it's a matter of when they buy from you. So email marketing. Oh shoot, what was the other part of the question?
On that before, the next thing was more about, we're talking about untraditional touch points and media and where that's nowadays. But I did want to say one thing about that on email. I came to my role about a little under 5 years ago, and we had all these emails, and we had no organization to our email strategy, right? It was just like a random email every once in a while, and I was like, what is going on here? So, but when the numbers don't lie, right? And I think on email marketing, there is it's still really effective, and we've seen a lot of folks work on it. But it's funny because I do hear that conversation a lot with my students, saying like, why do we continue to do these programs? And I'm like, look at these open rates, look at these click-through rates, how long they're going to these.
I've had clients that get 50 or 60% open rate, and a 28% click-through rate. So suddenly all these metrics are saying something. What's funny is when you want to see all the things you've signed up for is the last day of the year, because everybody and their brother, you haven't bought anything from this company in 4 years. Hey, we've updated our terms of service. click, it's like delete,
Yeah.
unsubscribe. It's all like, the 31st of December.
But anyway, we could probably talk about email.
Untraditional. Sorry, I
Yeah.
wind up going. I think earned media still has a really strong place. So earned media would be any kind of PR outreach. Paid media would be pay to play, or like a Google ad. In certain sectors, coming out of the mining sector, you want to be featured in this newsletter, it's 10 grand. So there's a lot of pay to play stuff that looks like editorial, but it's not. It's paid media. I think all those things are really important.
Got it. I did want to, so there's a lot of good questions here, and it's hard because there's like so many big topics that I think you've sparked in folks. And so I do want to, so we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to keep kind of going through it. Let me stop me when we get kind of close to it. When it comes to COVID, and sorry, you know what, we'll save that for the very end. Folks do want to know a little bit more about you and your story, and maybe just a story of with a client. Maybe an interesting story that did you ever regret working with a client? It sounds like you moved away from working with a company to work on your own so you could be more selective, if I'm thinking back to your story. So has there ever been a time that you ever regretted working with a particular client? Meaning, in hindsight, did you ever, like, how do you select a client, I guess, is also another question that comes with that, but just a little insights on that.
What's the PG version of this? Some clients are assholes, and it's just the way that it is. Some clients want results tomorrow, and some clients want to understand the process. That's now pushing towards where I want to go. When a client says to me, okay, you're big on strategy, I don't exactly know what that is. I know what a strategy is, but I don't understand how it would apply to my business. And I said, old school, we would just put out a bunch of press releases. Now what we do is we build a strategy. We align the strategy to your company goals. When I work with a client, I get access to their financials. One of the goals is going to be growth. So, I have a client that's doing year to date, a period over period last year, and they're at about 38.5% growth. So means first half, right, January to June 30th, they're 38.5% more revenue than they were this period last year. And we can attribute that to what we're doing. And I'll take credit for all of it, but there's some growth things built in. But the fact that they went through a global pandemic and no negative hits, we chart everything. I make the clients sit down and go through the quarter ending PowerPoint. And we look at the goals and we look at the work and, okay, what did we do well? Was there anything we should have done different? Do we need to course adjust the scope of work or the strategy?
Yeah.
All of those things are pieces of my ideal client. When I get a call that says, how much do you charge for a press release? Like, I'm not the right guy. Yeah. Because we don't do one-off marketing work. You can't measure it. We do campaigns. So it takes, I'm writing a proposal right now for an industrial company. And I'm like, it's going to take 6 to 9 months, for all of this to take root. And they have to be good with that. A lot of retail, small mom and pop stores, they kind of need results right away. And you have to, talk to them. If they're like, well, we don't need to have that conversation, just go market stuff. Mm-hmm. Not a good fit for me.
Yeah. Yep. Gotcha. Okay, well, I think we got the story without getting the story, so I want to say we're good on that question. So I do want to move a little bit to COVID. We got this last 5 minutes here, and this could be its own hour, right? But
Yeah, definitely.
when it comes to, I think, just to kind of bring it full circle to some of the lessons you talked about in your presentation, when it comes to being sincere and when it comes to addressing the concerns that happened out there, maybe just some advice for our folks on the line about how did you work through this particular incident, maybe a good example, and then what can folks be doing right now in this profession to kind of be better, especially because I think communications is going to be the center point for everything that's going to be happening, because all of the changes that have been announced by businesses, it's all their comm teams, right, or their folks who are doing that information. So just advice you have in navigating this, and then also a little bit about your experience so far.
Yeah, so my experience through COVID is a little on the bizarre side. In September of last year, I had knee replacement surgery. I wound up, which should have been, 2 days of limping and then rehab. I wound up having a total of 5 surgeries over 6 months. Couldn't walk. I wound up having a really bad infection, so was having an IV every morning and doing nothing, and wound up losing all my clients. Found them homes or projects ended. So by the time that I started getting better, the whole rest of the world was locked down. I basically just sent some emails out. It's like, hey, you doing okay? Anything I can help with? Anything you need help with? Again, how may I help you? Wound up picking up some work and getting back to a point where I was okay. Being financially fit is really important, especially if you're a freelancer, because we tend to, live check to check, but you've got to come up with a plan to put some money in the bank in case something comes up, which I've been pretty smart about. And it really saved us. I mean, and then ironically, my wife supervises a COVID unit at the hospital she works at. So, it's been a little bit trying. I found that a lot of companies are really, really afraid of what's going on right now. They don't know what to do. They're almost overthinking it, which I don't say to downplay what's going on at all. It's actually nice being on a webinar. I don't have to have my mask on. But they're not sure how to engage during this really awkward time. And I just keep going back to that slide with the bullets that we saw twice, which is just be sincere and authentic. Don't try to sell. If you try to sell, you're going to get labeled insensitive. If you try to help, it will come across more sincere. And some people might take advantage of it, but most people are pretty good. And they'll look for an opportunity to work together, or tell me more about that. Which means you need to have your story, because when you send that email that says, how can I help you? It's like, okay, wait, you do PR, right? Tell me again what you do. And it's like, you got to have that elevator pitch. An elevator pitch, I think everybody probably knows what that is, but an elevator pitch, there's only 2 responses you're looking for. Oh, and they turn around, right? They break the gaze. Yeah. Oh, okay. Or they say, really, tell me more. That's it. You're not looking for a purchase order. Nobody's got a purchase order in their pocket. You're looking for an opportunity to tell your story. That's it. So when, hey, how about if I schedule a 15-minute Zoom call, and I haven't seen you in so long, we can just chat about what we do. It's as simple as that, and being consistent. So, and if you're not on LinkedIn, you need to be on LinkedIn, especially if you do kind of B2B, because it's important.
Thank you so much. I do want to ask you one final question. I'm going to hand it over to Noemi. Do you any recommended materials or books or articles to follow? I know you gave your LinkedIn. You said there's a. Noemi, I think I froze.
You're
you
back
put out.
now.
You're back now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. Kind of back. So here, let me do this. I'm going to go ahead and stop my video just so you can hear my audio. That should work. It tends to work a little better sometimes. Any better? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, just a question about your any recommended books that or materials for folks to follow after this to keep.
Yeah, there's a ton. You know, if you're a little more sales oriented, there's some great books out there. I'm trying to think oh man, Fanatical Prospecting. I just finished, and it's really about the front end of sales, but there's so much information in it, and he talks about just everything from how to send a good email and build a pipeline. So Fanatical Prospecting, and Jeb Blount, Blount is the author. I think anything by Seth Godin, Godin, and just be a joiner. Join an organization. Join, you know, if you're in PR, join PRSA. If you're more on the marketing side, join AMA. If you're more in the creative world, kind of the ad side, join your local ad club. And, you know, so I just finished that Fanatical Prospecting, and I went into one of my groups and said, hey, anybody read any good books lately? You know, and there was probably 25 answers to that. And it's like, okay, these are people kind of like me. So they're all at my level. And so I take that recommendation with a little more authority.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I do have to, I'm going to hand it off to Noemi, but did want to say everyone should definitely follow our friend Ira on LinkedIn if possible. It sounds like there's some good content to get from following you there, but let me hand it over to Noemi.
Thanks, James.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you, James, for a great conversation today, and definitely a reminder for everyone to look for you on LinkedIn. And a reminder that this session was recorded and it will be uploaded to our website at csuob.edu/alumni. And don't forget to follow us on social media at CSUB Alumni to learn about future chats like this one. Thank you and have a great day.